Like, welcome everyone. Hello, good day. Nice to see you. It seems like it's been so long.
Hello.
Hi, it's great to see you. Yeah, so welcome. And this is our first NGO CSW New York monthly meeting for the UN New Year, September. The New York is very busy right now getting prepared for the General Assembly and the Summit of the Future that's coming up in Action Days. Before we jump into the business and program and all of that, we like to take a moment, of quiet, before we jump in. So if everyone can just, a moment of reflection or whatever you like to, moment of breath or whatever, if you can join me in that, and then we'll start shortly after.
Someone was detected at your front door.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Pamela, my co-chair.
Thank you, Ivy, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. And thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to begin this exciting Beijing Plus 30 year with you today. And our first announcement is exciting for us. Excuse me, we have new interns. We have Angela, she, her, and she's our communications intern. She's a graduate of Fordham University with a master's in social work. And Angela actually spent 2 years in the Peace Corps in Namibia. Welcome, Angela. And then we have Mads Vavam, and she's one of our advocacy and administrative interns. They are a recent graduate in psychology and women and gender studies from Florida State University. They are a musician and they play piano. Welcome, Mads. And our third intern is Beck, she, her, and she's one of our advocacy and administrative interns. And she is currently pursuing an advanced certificate in gender and sexuality studies at the New School, and she holds an MFA in poetry and creative writing. Welcome, Beck. I'm turning it over to Ivy.
Pamela, can you do the next one, the EC?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I'd like to welcome new EC members. Marlene McLean from Seroptimus International. Marlene, can you please turn on your camera and wave? Fotini Papagiatti, who's with the International Center for Research on Women. Fotini, can you please wave? And then Michelle Peden, who is with AHAM Education. Michelle, can you wave so people can see who you are? And we are really honored and delighted to have these 3 new EC members. They bring a wealth of information and knowledge to the EC, and they really will help us to become a more rich, vibrant executive committee. And as most of you know, the NGO CSW executive committee is a working committee. And so these wonderful women have really, pledged their time and their efforts to bring the forum and all of the other things that we do to life. So thank you, Marlene, Fotini, and Michelle, for sharing your gifts with us. And now I will really turn it over to Ivy.
Thank you, Pamela. And so we held 2 retreats this summer to plan for this upcoming year. And we've made some decisions. A lot of what you're going to hear during this business meeting is based on those retreats. And so we discussed, the forum, which is in March, and all the activities in between now and then and through June, which is the end of our year. And so we will continue with the working groups on social justice and the peace and gender equality working groups. And you are able to sign up if you want to join, and you could just send an email to info@ngocsw.org if you're interested to join. And we have decided to focus on one shared topic between these 2 working groups. And once that's confirmed, we will share that with all of the working group members. But just wanted to share that. And then parallel events. I know this is like one of the biggest, highlights of the forum. So they are going to open on the 23rd, which is next Monday. We're trying to move everything earlier than we have in the past years. So please look out for that, because it's going to be first come, first served this year. We've never done it this way before. So we really, as much as possible, please share with all your friends, colleagues, networks who have done CSWs for many years now that, please alert. We will try as much as possible to prepare everyone that of these little changes. They're not too major, but there are definitely some changes. We are encouraging partnerships. Actually, you will need co-sponsors for your event to be considered. And as you know, every year we've been getting so many more applications, and we only have so many venue locations. Oh, I don't know whose screen is being shared. But there's this. Oh, okay. And then and we are also we have limited number of rooms, and as you know, there are 5 events per day. So they start at 8:30 and the last one ends at 6 o'clock. We're going to keep to that schedule this coming year as well. And we are confirming the venues. Once that is completely confirmed on Monday, you will see what is available. Like I said, since you have to sign up first come. And because we're opening events early, that means we're also going to close the deadline for applications will also close earlier as well. And I guess I will do now a poll on consultation day. So in person or virtual. So would you pay, and it'll pop up on your screen. Would you pay $100 to attend an in-person consultation day? We would like your thoughts on this. the deadline, Pamela, do we have a confirmed deadline for the parallel events? I wasn't sure if we had a.
I know they're going to launch on next Monday, the 23rd, but I'm not sure about the deadline.
Yeah, we know it'll be moved up, but we haven't decided yet on what that date would actually be. And again, because we have so many applications and we need to review them, if you can imagine, we all by hand are reviewing like over 800 applications. And so that, and again, we're like volunteer based, right? We have Rachel, who's our paid office staff. The rest of us are volunteering our time for this. And so we need to start earlier because we push everything and then the holidays come up and it's just way too stressful for everybody. So we really want to practice self-care. And also we think that it's better for you to have that information, especially for those of you who have to have a visa to get here. We want to give you as much information ahead of time as possible. So look out for that. Again, when it opens on Monday, we will give you a deadline then, most likely. Yes, so only in-person events. And I forgot to mention, we have virtual events just like we did before, and we will have a platform. Oh, that's another big announcement. We've decided to go back to Whova. I think many of you asked for Whova. So we're going to be going back to Whova for our virtual platform. And then I was wondering, did we get the answers, Rachel, from the poll? I'm curious to know how many would pay $100 for a consultation day in person. That was how much actually it used to be before COVID. No is the majority. Got it. Thank you so much. This really helps us in our decision making. So that's why we wanted to engage you. Thank you. I think it's Pamela.
Oh, I thought, okay. We're going to have member-led monthly programs, as you know, each month. NGO CSW has a business portion of the meeting and then a program portion of the meeting. And historically, NGO CSW New York has been in charge of the program. Well, we're going to try an experiment. We are offering our member organizations to apply to actually produce a program either in December, where we're looking at media and human rights, 2 of the 12 critical areas of concern in the Beijing Platform for Action, or in January, education and poverty. Those are 2 very, very important meetings, and we are really delighted to be able to invite our membership to produce the programmatic part of the meeting. And this is for paid members of NGO CSW only. If your organization is a paid member, you are invited to fill out the form expressing interest in producing either the December NGO CSW meeting that's going to look at 2 of the critical areas, media and human rights, or the January meeting looking at education and poverty. And the link to the form is in the chat. We'd also, like to share with you that CSW revitalization continues to be in the pact of the future. And revision 4, action 45, paragraph D reads, request ECOSOC through an inclusive intergovernmental process to explore options in the context of the forthcoming 30th anniversary of the 4th World Conference on Women to revitalize the Commission on the Status of Women, to promote the full and effective implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, to achieve gender equality, the empowerment of all women and girls, and promote and protect their human rights, and to ensure that the Commission is fit for purpose, while reaffirming the Commission's mandate and consider options as required to strengthen other subsidiary organs of the Council. And this is major because in the fourth revision, the language is even richer and more specific about the necessity of revitalizing CSW. So that is a real victory for us as civil society, that they want to make CSW relevant and give it authority and the ability to be monitored. I'd also like to announce a very, very special series that NGO CSW New York is embarking on with John Jay College for Criminal Justice. And it is the John Jay Community Event Series on the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. There will be 4 sessions in New York in person. The first session is September 19th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And the theme is the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, reflecting on the past and leaning forward, with Soon Young Yoon, Lopa Banjari, and lecturer Helena Pia Camella. And it is going to be a rich conversation looking at the past, the present, and the future. We will serve refreshments. There will be a light dinner. So if you have not already registered, a link will be in the chat. On October 10th at 1:30 p.m., the program will be Femicide in the Americas, with a film screening of the movie Norma, which looks at, femicide in Mexico. On November 22nd at 1:30, the theme will be Unite Against Gender-Based Violence. And as you know, the Secretary General's Unite campaign coincides with the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And then on December 12th at 6 p.m., the theme will be education as a pathway to leadership. CSW 69. Okay. So Ivy, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So is this my turn?
Yes.
Yes, it's my turn. Sorry. We have like this run of show document, and then because you guys don't get to see it, but all of our names got moved around, so now we don't know who's doing what. So that's why we keep asking each other. But anyway, so UN Women, I wanted to give some of their updates. We are inviting them to join these monthly meetings, so hopefully in the future we send a representative to give these updates themselves. I think right now they're definitely very busy, getting prepared for the Summit of the Future. I think a lot of the UN Women activities during the Action Days will be on the 21st, which is the Saturday of September. And most will probably be available on the web TV that you could watch from home. So you don't have to necessarily be here in New York for that. And as far as CSW 69, which is Beijing 30 years since the Declaration and Beijing Platform for Action, Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action were adopted in China. And this is a review year. So this is the year that we review and appraise the implementation of the platform for action and the outcomes of the 23rd special session of the General Assembly. And so it is not going to be like the usual, I guess, CSWs where we have a priority theme and a review theme. There will not be an agreed conclusion. There will be a declaration. And if you've seen past declarations, they're pretty, they're all pretty similar. It's not too dramatic. But anyway, wanted to share that. And the chair this year of the Bureau is from Saudi Arabia. Mr. Abdulaziz Al-Wasil, and the Bureau members are Netherlands, Costa Rica, Cabo Verde, and Ukraine. And there are regional reviews that are taking place throughout, all the 5 regions. The one I'm aware of, and please, anybody here in this meeting who knows of the other reviews, please put it in the chat. Geneva, the UNECE, the Europe and North America's regional review is on the 21st and 22nd of October. And that is it for my part, I believe.
Thank you, Ivy. And at this time, I am very pleased to acknowledge NGO CSW Executive Committee member Lily Nkuzimama, who is the representative to the UN from the Baha'i International Community, who is going to be the moderator for the programmatic section of our meeting. Thank you, Lily. I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Pamela, and thank you, Ivy, for the warm welcome and for all the updates regarding NGO CSW and the NGO Forum. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here with you on the very first meeting of NGO CSW for the UN calendar year. It's like we're all going back to school with all the busyness and hecticness that requires. I'm very happy to be here as member of NGO CSW Exec, but also as a representative to the UN for the Baha'i International Community. So we have a wonderful panel of speakers, and I'm not going to speak too much, but I just want to share a few pieces of information about the panel discussion as well as the modality so that I can hand it over to our panelists and they will share with us some of their insights on 2 of the areas of critical concern that we will be speaking about. And this will be a pattern for us moving forward. We will be looking at these 2 areas of critical concern over the next couple of months so that we prepare for Beijing +30 review in March. So the way that we will be discussing today is that we have 3 speakers with us who will share insights for about 10 minutes. We will then move into a question period where we welcome questions both from individuals who want to take the floor and ask their questions directly to the speakers, but also you're more than welcome to pose the questions in the chat. And my fellow exec members and I will try to keep track of them and pose them to the panelists if you like. So just a little bit of information about the moment of time that we're in right now. As was mentioned, the upcoming CSW is really going to be an opportunity to review where we are in implementing the Beijing Platform for Action. And so as we are preparing for this moment, we really want to maybe go back to the Platform for Action and see what it says about the 2 areas of critical concern that we're going to be looking at today. So one of them is women in power and decision-making. And really this area of critical concern looks at how we can promote women's economic empowerment, including equal pay, access to employment and financial resources, and addressing barriers to women's participation in the economy. Oh, excuse me, I think that's the one on women in the economy. So when we look at the Platform for Action on women in decision-making, it's looking at protecting and promoting the human rights of women and girls, including their civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. And the Beijing Platform really, it reminds us that within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right to take part in the decisions are made by their government. The platform also speaks to how the power relations that we currently see, I mean, this is a document that was written 30 years ago, but many of aspects of it still are relevant today. And it speaks to the power relations that govern our relations today, that women really are still being prevented from leading fulfilling lives and operate at many levels of society from the very personal to the highly public. And the platform has a number of policy recommendations, but one of them talks about how we need to promote public debate on the new roles every individual can have in the society, especially in the private sphere, which is what we're doing today, is really having a public conversation about some of these power relations. And then on women in economy, it really talks about women having access to to be able to influence the policy decisions that govern our participation in the economy. And it also speaks to the importance of women being able to shape the structures of our economies. It speaks to the attitudinal obstacles that inhibit women's participation in developing economic policy. But it also speaks to the many different challenges, specifically unremunerated domestic work and community work, such as the care that often is done by women of children and older persons, preparing meals for the family, protecting the environment, and providing voluntary assistance to vulnerable groups and disadvantaged individuals. I think we have to remember, we talk about these two areas of critical concern, that it's also happening among many other ongoing processes that have ramifications at the local, national, and international level, and that all these different levels of governance really affect one another. There's an ongoing conversation between one another. So next week, actually starting this Sunday and Monday, is going to be the Summit of the Future. And this is really the culmination of the All Common Agenda process that was launched by the Secretary General. And he was given this mandate by the member states on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the UN. So that is going to be taking place in just a few days. We're also having this conversation in the context of the upcoming Second World Social Summit on social development, which will be taking place in Qatar in November of 2025. And lastly, we're speaking about this as the preparations are being made for the 4th International Conference of Financing for Development, which will be taking place from June 30th to the 3rd of July in 2025 in Spain. So all of these conversations, these processes have an impact on the conversations that we're having, and gives us an opportunity to be able to bring insights from the Beijing Platform for Action into these processes and these conversations. So with that being said, and with that kind of framework being set, I would now like to give the floor to our first speaker, Dr. Jemima Njuki, who is the Chief of Economic Empowerment at UN Women. So perhaps we can spotlight her and give Dr. Njuki the floor. And of course, the biographies of the speakers are in the program, so you can read more about the speakers there.
Hi, Lily. I'm not sure if she is here yet.
Hello, can you hear me?
Maybe Teresa, we might have to spotlight Teresa, who will, I think Teresa had just unmuted herself. So if you, I think you have to spotlight Teresa because that's where Dr. Njuki is. There we go. Wonderful. You have the floor, Dr. Njuki, over to you.
I was a little bit concerned because I've been listening to you all, and then I heard that you couldn't see me. Thank you so much, Lily, and thanks for inviting me to come and share some of my perspectives on the topic. And thank you also for providing that context, because indeed we are speaking at a time when so much is coming together, that we're not just thinking about the Summit of the Future and the Pact for the Future, but also how we are going to finance that agenda with the FFD coming up next year as well. So it's just a really excellent opportunity to also be celebrating and preparing for the celebration of Beijing plus 30. So you asked me to reflect on a couple of things as part of my conversation with you today. And just to properly introduce myself, my name is Jemima Njuki, and I lead UN Women's work on economic empowerment. And so we are leading on putting together the progress that we've made on women in the economy, as well as the area on environment, which also falls under our economic empowerment section. So the first thing that you asked me to reflect on is the ways in which interventions that seek to work with women's economic empowerment must also take into account the men who are in the lives of women, and how powerful women's movements can include men who continue to be overrepresented in decision making. And I think
I'm so sorry, Jemima. I think we're getting some messages in the chat that the sound is a little bit unclear. My apologies for interrupting. I don't know if there's anything that can be done on your end to fix the audio just so that everybody can benefit from hearing your intervention.
Let me increase my volume. Does that change? Does that make a difference? Is that better?
Okay, I see it's coming through the chat. It's better. People are hearing better. Okay, wonderful. Slightly better.
I'll just try and project my voice a little bit as well.
Thank you.
So as I was mentioning, I was asked to reflect on two key things. One is on the ways in which we can engage men around issues of women in the economy. And the next one is on some of the key messages that we have as UN Women in connection with this critical area of concern of women in the economy. So let me just start with the first one on my reflections on engaging men around women's economic empowerment and how women's movements can include men who continue to be overrepresented in decision-making roles. And I want to start on a light note, but also from a point where I think we can all identify with. So in 2023, Barbie, the film, I don't know how many of you watched Barbie, the movie, that imagines a world that's led by women. It became one of the highest grossing films of all time at more than $1.4 billion. And this was a remarkable achievement by a woman director, a woman star and producer. One of the most memorable characters in the movie, however, as evidenced by, this elaborate song and dance number, was actually a man. Yet, somehow there were still critics who complained that Barbie went too far and was so much in favor of women's empowerment that people found it anti-men. And I would actually like to argue that I find that, and at least I know a lot of us found that completely absurd, because promoting women's empowerment neither excludes men, nor comes at the expense of men. And yet this is something we continuously have to grapple with, or those of us who work on gender equality and women's empowerment have to grapple with. And the simple reason is that the problem that we are facing, the problem that's ahead of us, the problem that's staring at us is actually patriarchy. And in fact, men are part of the solution. So the reason to engage men in our efforts to promote women's empowerment is not just because they occupy most positions of power, and we need them as allies. It is also not only because every family consists of both men and women, and we need to buy into social norms change that challenges traditional family roles and subordinates women. These are, of course, valid and important reasons to engage men. However, I would argue that if these are the only reasons to engage men, then the world will always be a man's world, because we will not have to put the institutions and norms at the heart of gender inequality, or in other words, we will have not tackled patriarchy. And so we need a much broader view of what we are dealing with here. And one of the important things that I would like to say is we can engage men to challenge patriarchy. Addressing patriarchy requires work at multiple scales, from the attitudes, beliefs, and practices of individuals and communities to institutions, including workplaces, community organizations, and public services, to economic markets, and even laws, policies, norms, and regulations at national and international levels. It also requires that we engage from, we have engagement and action from diverse stakeholders, each of which has a role to play, from women's movements, civil society organizations, workers' representatives, the private sector, employers and organizations, to multilateral organizations, including international financial institutions. And we know men are members of all these groups. And just as women are not a homogeneous group, we also have to be aware that men are not either. Like women, their experiences are shaped by things like race, class, disability, nationality, sexuality, gender identity. So really starting from a point where we are recognizing that not all men are powerful and not all men and masculinities are problematic either. And so just reflecting on this issue that you asked me to really reflect on, recognizing that driving women's economic empowerment requires going beyond promoting positive male role models and inclusive leadership to really questioning the unjust ways that power is distributed in the economy and how we can consistently, deliberately, and radically eliminate the injustices that we see in the economy today. What this requires is that we have large-scale social mobilization with diverse stakeholders. As you know, UN Women convenes Generation Equality, and one of the action coalitions where we really bring in multiple stakeholders is the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition, which for us is a vehicle for co-creation with diverse stakeholders, including men, civil society organizations, youth, government, private sectors, to really imagine a different kind of economy that works for women and that works for everybody and that does not leave anyone behind. So what are the key messages that we then have as we put together the preparations for celebrating Beijing +30 in this critical area of concern of women in the economy? I think first I want to reiterate that the Beijing Platform for Action rightly recognized that lack of economic opportunities, access to economic resources, education opportunities, and exclusion from participation in decision-making are directly related to women's persistent poverty and exclusion from the benefits of economic prosperity. So that's a huge departure point when we think about Beijing +30 and this area of critical concern. And so just a couple of key messages. The first one is that we must focus on ways to create and justly distribute economic value in ways that enable women to realize their rights and in ways that create the conditions for economic prosperity for all. I think this is really, really critical. Gender equality and women's empowerment is catalytic because it is a goal we must strive for that is anchored in human rights, but is also intertwined with all the other sustainable development goals. So that's one message, that we think about economic prosperity for women as a goal in itself, as an end in itself, but also as a prerequisite for the achievement of other goals. And sometimes we do forget and look at and instrumentalize women and see them just as a vehicle for the achievement of other goals without recognizing. And I think here I'm probably preaching to the converted without recognizing women's economic prosperity, women's empowerment, women having power as an end in itself, as important for women's human dignity, as important for women themselves. I think the second message that I want to give, and mainly because we do talk about this as though women are not already in the economy, that women are contributing to the economy through their work, through their entrepreneurship, through their community engagement and leadership, through their stewardship of the environment and natural resources, through taking on a disproportionate share of unpaid care and domestic work. In fact, I put it that women for many years, for a long time, have been subsidizing the economy through the contribution they make to unpaid care work. Now, they're doing this in an economic system that does not always work for them. Because we know in this economic system, there are deeply rooted inequalities that are present in our institutions, that are present in our systems. And I just want to talk about a couple of numbers that as we put together this reflection of where we are at as we celebrate Beijing +30 next year, what are some of the gaps we see where we see women situated in the economy? And a lot of it really just to reinforce the point I made, that we have built an economic system that is not always working for women, despite their numerous contributions to that economic system. So just a couple of numbers. The first area on poverty. We have social protection systems that are not reaching women, despite what we know as the important role that social protection plays. Only 26% of women globally have access to social protection. Yeah. We know that at the current rate of investments, more than 340 million women and girls will still live in extreme poverty by 2030. And despite the fact that we keep saying we need investments in women, we need investments in gender equality, we have a current gap of about 360 billion per year for developing countries to address gender equality under the SDGs. This is so much less than what we're spending on wars today. And so the world is also not putting their money where their mouth is, despite the global community, governments talking about the importance of gender equality. We still continue to see underinvestment in gender equality. On issues like women and opportunities in the economic system, we know the number of working age women globally who would like to work but do not have a job is 15% compared to 10.5% for men. We see these disparities widen in certain contexts. We know there's a 32% gap in number of men and women who own businesses, and a 20% gap in those that actually want to start businesses. Women are spending around 3 times more time on unpaid care work than men do. And we know these disparities in unpaid care work are actually a profound driver of restricting women's and girls' time and opportunities for education, for decent paid work, for public life, but even just for rest and leisure, and women having control over their time. These conditions, of course, are not acceptable, and there remains an urgent need to do something about it in a way that is transformative, in a way that is large scale, in a way that is driving the needed investments. As an organization, as UN Women, we feel we have a unique position to address some of these systemic inequalities through our triple mandate of implementation on the ground, through partnerships with many of you, through our coordination of the UN system and making sure that the UN system has front, right, and center the gender equality agenda, but also through our normative work at global, but also at national and regional levels. In March, we published our economic empowerment strategy. And one of the things we wanted to do with this strategy is really define economic empowerment in a systemic way. That we are not just looking at economic empowerment as putting money and resources in the hands of women, but in a way that we are actually challenging economic systems, in a way that we are challenging power, so that we have economic systems that work for women. And so we have a definition of economic empowerment that looks at three components. One is power, the second is resources, and the third is changes in systems. With power here implying women's agency and autonomy, with resources also encompassing the rights to ownership, but also access to resources, and systems referring to the institutions and norms that need to change so that they work for women. And in line with this strategy, we really are stepping up our efforts on women in the world of work, on transforming the care economy, but also looking at the climate crisis and how we can address the climate crisis in a gender-responsive way, including driving climate financing to the grassroots organizations, to the women's rights organizations, and to the women who are every day on the front lines of addressing climate change. At the cornerstone of this strategy is working with civil society and diverse partners, including through our convening power, generating the data and evidence that's needed, working with civil society organizations, including Men Engage alliances, to advance norms and change harmful social norms. But more importantly, I'm excited about the work that we have at country level, at local level, community level, really driving tangible results for women and girls through our programming. So we have a clarity of vision in terms of what needs to be done and what needs to change. And in this lead up to the 30th anniversary of the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, we will continue to raise our voices about women's economic empowerment and what needs to change in the economic system so that it actually works for women and girls everywhere. I'm going to stop there, but really happy to engage around questions and even give some of the practical examples that we have of our work to change systems, including financial systems, so that they are aligned with women's needs and priorities.
Thank you so much, Dr. Njuki, for sharing with us your insights, for also providing us with a good understanding of the ways that UN Women is approaching the question of economic empowerment for women, and particularly for highlighting the systemic change that needs to happen. I would now pass the floor over to Dr. Jayati Ghosh, who is the professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. My ESL is coming out. I always trip over that word. But please, Dr. Ghosh, you have the floor. Over to you. Oh, I'm so sorry, Dr. Ghosh. I think you still...
Oh, apologies. Yeah, I know. I don't know why we keep making this mistake after all these years, but still, yeah, thank you. Let me be, I'm actually going to talk about something that is related but slightly tangential, because I believe everything I could say about the conditions of women and what needs to be done, you already know. I don't want to belabor the obvious. I think you already know, and we all know the things that need to be done. I'm going to ask a slightly different question. Why aren't we more successful? Why are we so unable to get all of these things done, even in a significant or marginally significant way? I'm thinking of the Beijing Platform for Action. It's nearly 3 decades. Next year will be the 30th anniversary. And in a way, it's depressing reading, because everything that it says is still directly relevant and necessary and important. In other words, we haven't really gone very far. And in many countries, we know that we have actually regressed. So what's going wrong? Why are we unable to make our voice more heard? Why are all the efforts of UN Women, of the CSW, of all of the other agencies that are saying all the right things, not getting more traction within countries and globally and in the international institutions? I think part of it is certainly patriarchy. We know that it's there, it's powerful, that it exists, it will continue, and we have to fight against it, of course. But I think there is another issue here in terms of maybe our strategies. Maybe there's something in the way that we are approaching all of the demands that we make, including for very, very obvious things that are somehow not able to generate sufficient force and mobilization to actually cause changes. And here I'm referring not just to national economies and governments, where we all know the various problems and how things can get reversed, but also international institutions. And let's be honest, the international financial institutions, for example, still continue to operate pretty much as they did then, despite all of the noises that are made and despite all of the gestures towards women's empowerment or recognition of the role of women and recognition of unpaid work, at least in the preamble, not necessarily in the policy proposals or recommendations. So I mean, we have to now start worrying or thinking through how we are more strategic in terms of actually getting some of these things implemented or made impossible to ignore. And that's really what I want to talk to you about, because I believe, look, I mean, we all know the problems, we all know many of the solutions. There are wonderful documents from UN Women, from UNDP, from ILO, from UNRIST that give us a blueprint, yeah? So how do we actually move forward on this? And what is it that is preventing bigger movements on this side? For example, in the coming Summit for the Future, how many of the things that we really want to see out there are actually going to be put into action, not just into the general words? And everybody loves to say empower women. That's all part of the deal now. But in terms of actual policies, actual strategies, how much of that is going to get implemented? And unfortunately, I think we're going to find relatively little. So now let's stop and ask ourselves, fine, we know this isn't exactly working the way we want. How do we make it work? What can we do at least to push in the other direction, instead of accepting the fact that it's not working and saying, never mind, we'll just keep saying it in the hope that at some point somebody will listen. So there are two things I want to highlight about our strategy broadly. And now I'm talking specifically in the international system, because this is for CSW after all. And that's very much rooted in the international system. I think, one, we have to admit that certain things haven't panned out the way we intended to. And here I'm identifying gender budgeting as an area where my own belief is that we got conned. We got fobbed off with a completely superficial and often misleading approach to gender budgeting, where government after government simply puts some numbers into things saying, oh, this affects so many women, or so much of the spending is going to benefit women, in a purely formalistic, ritualistic exercise without real content, and then can claim that they're doing gender budgeting. That's not what we wanted. That's not what we intended. But unfortunately, that's what we've been left with. We need to call the bluff and say, no, that's not what we wanted, and that's not what we asked for, and don't fob us off with that, I think. And there are various other rabbit holes, I think, that we've been led into or manipulated into, whichever way you want to call it, that perhaps we need to recognize and say, fine, that one, we tried it, it didn't work the way we wanted, we're moving on, we're now making a different demand. And I do believe that that's very important, because all of the things that are said in the Beijing Platform about the existing realities and the impacts remain true, right? So we have to actually now begin to attack some of those, including globally. So the second area in which I think we have to be much more frontal is in looking at the ways in which economic policies are proposed and implemented by international organizations. I can definitely mention the international financial institutions, but that's like an easy pick, right? Everybody knows that there are problems with the way the IMF imposes austerity, or some of the conditionalities of the World Bank. That's not news. It's no big deal. There's been so much literature on it. We can identify that. But even in terms of UN organizations, some of the public-private partnerships are deeply problematic in terms of how they end up impacting women on the ground. We should be willing and able to call those out and say, no, that's not working. Some of the reliance, I have been on a committee on the economics of health for all for the WHO. Some of the reliance on private funding, including philanthropic funding, has led to, frankly, counterproductive strategies in certain countries and regions with regard to access to health. Again, we should be able to recognize these failings and say, well, no, that's not what we meant when we said that we have to think of multiplying the sources of finance and so on. Finally, I think we really, because let's face it, we obviously lack power, including in the global architecture, despite the presence of women. And here, okay, it's a side point, and then I will come to what I think is my main proposal, maybe a suggestion for this. But the side point is about women leadership. I mean, that's really the topic, the theme for this session, right? And it is true that there have been governments with women leaders that have been remarkable in the attempt to transform the way we look at the economy. Okay, so for example, I'm thinking of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. I'm thinking of Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. I'm thinking of the president of Iceland, who all actually made genuine efforts to move towards a well-being economy that recognized unpaid labor and its contribution, that recognizes all of the things that impact humans, women, men, and the planet in different ways, and therefore changed the required indicators. So yes, those were governments led by women that did that. But there are other governments led by women, I don't want to mention them, some in Europe, some in other places, which have not done that, have been very much within the same old neoliberal patriarchal trajectory. So having women is not in itself enough. Of course, ideally, we want many, many more women, but it's not enough. We need to make sure that there is so much pressure from below, from society, that women's needs and the kinds of opportunities that they get and so on cannot be ignored, whether by a man in power or a woman in power. And I think that's really our focus. Should not be women in leadership so much as, of course, it's good to have women in leadership, but is that going to be enough? No, because the broader power structures will remain very, very gender unbalanced. And that's where we have to focus on. So then my final point, really, how do we focus on that? How do we try and get change? Because now I'm not talking about what we need to do. I really think all of us know that. In broad measures and in specifics, we know pretty much, and in different contexts. So I'm not talking about that. I'm saying, how do we implement that? And here I think it is so important for us to build coalitions, recognizing that we are relatively less powerful, recognizing that there is a huge tendency to silo all the stuff relating to women, to have different desks related to gender, to have a gender expert there who will, kind of rabbit on from the side without really having an impact on the decision making. So we have to build coalitions. And that also means being very plugged into the discussions that are going on in the other parts of the UN system. So for example, I don't know how many of you are following the discussions on beyond GDP that have been going on in the UN. I was involved in this. I'm on a board of the Economic and Social Affairs Board of the UN, and we had suggested 5 additional indicators that should be used by all countries in addition to GDP. Now, what that means is that the UN statistical system adopts it and actually insists that every country collects the data on this. And for countries that cannot afford it, you get not just technical assistance, but also financial assistance to collect these data. So just as with GDP, it is mandatory for every government to collect data, GDP and basic employment, we are suggesting 5 other indicators that would be mandatory for every government to provide and collect the information on. And that's a way of, we all recognize the problems with GDP, but instead of constantly complaining about it, let's say, okay, well, we'll have these other indicators as well, because no one's going to dump GDP today. Now let's use these indicators, let's track them and see what they tell us about the real state of well-being in the economy. So the first indicator is what I have called the labor market indicator. This is the proportion of people who are gainfully employed in the working age population, disaggregated by gender, multiplied by the median wage rate. Now, the median wage rate is the average. That means that half of the workers get less and half of the workers get more. It's a better indicator than the mean wage rate, which is just you add up all the wages and divide by the number of workers, because that tends to skew towards the higher income. The higher income people inflated. The median wage is actually a better indicator of the average position of workers. So if we do the labor market indicator, we find that it varies a lot. In the US, for example, the labor market indicator is almost flat for the last 30 years, whereas the GDP per capita has been rising. In India, supposedly one of the fastest growing economies in the world, GDP per capita rising very rapidly, labor market indicator declining over the last decade. It's very different outcomes you get. Thailand, on the other hand, it's the other way around. The labor market indicator is doing better than GDP per capita in terms of growth. So in other words, you will actually get a sense of how ordinary people are affected, and you will get a gender differentiated sense of that if you track this indicator. Second indicator we had suggested was in time use. Now, we know that about 82 countries, maybe 84 now, are doing time use surveys, but it's really very rare. It's up to them, and they don't do it annually, certainly. They don't even do it necessarily with very regular periodicity. We are suggesting that we do track time use for 3 categories of time: paid work, unpaid work, and personal and relational time. Again, differentiated by gender. Yeah, it's expensive, but it's not so expensive as that it can't be done. And if you track that, once again, you actually get a better sense of the realities faced by the people in your country. And you can use that, again, to mobilize. You can say, why has unpaid labor gone up so much for women, for example? Or, all kinds of things you can do to mobilize along that. The third indicator we suggested is something that's already collected by the FAO. The proportion of the population that can access a nutritious diet. And they have an indicator that says if you spend more than 55% of your income on a basket, or if you would have to spend more than 55% of your income on a basket that is like the minimum you require to be a nutritious diet, then you are, in that sense, food poor. Once again, you get very, very different numbers. In India, again, I'm giving my country's example, income poverty supposedly now is about 14%. It's ridiculous. I mean, no one believes it, but nonetheless, that's the official number. The proportion of the population that cannot afford a nutritious diet is 74%. Very different numbers, right? But it also tells you that here's something you need to focus on. Here is a policy thing, and we all know the gender implications of that as well, right? The fourth indicator we suggested was per capita food grain consumption, which is a different kind of indicator. It's high for low income, and it's again high for high income, and it kind of goes down in the middle, typically. But depending on the per capita income of your country, if you have a decline, if your per capita income is low and you get a decline in per capita food grain consumption, that's bad news. If your per capita income is high and you get an increase, that's bad news again. Why? Because it means much more is going into livestock. Because a lot of the grain consumption is also for livestock rearing and so on. And then there are all of the sustainability implications of that. And the final indicator is something to do with the planet. We had suggested per capita carbon emissions, but not aggregate per capita only. That is the average carbon emissions per population, but multiplied by the carbon emissions of the top 10% of the population divided by the bottom 50%. In other words, the inequality in the carbon emissions, which is very strong in all of our countries, because that too captures something important. These are all data that can be collected. In many countries, they are already being collected. In the case of time use, they are not, but they can be if we make enough of a noise about it. But I have been waiting for more support from other UN bodies, from other people in the UN, from CSW, from everywhere. I don't get it. At least I don't see it. I mean, I was very involved in pushing for these indicators. I was delighted when it made it through to ECOSOC. There's a lot of fight going on in ECOSOC. This was something that was supposed to be presented for the Summit for the Future. It is not being presented because of resistance. Why aren't we mobilizing around this? Because at least it will help us in pushing some of the agenda that we want. I can think of many other examples where we really need to combine forces, not just with broader social movements and with international and other NGOs and so on, but also within the UN. We need to combine forces to fight for particular things. I really would like and request the CSW to get much more actively involved in the debates that are going on in the UN. There is a very important debate on taxation that has just started. And because the Group of Africa insisted on making taxation a UN thing rather than just something driven by the OECD. There is so much there that is of direct relevance to our own agenda, to the agenda of empowering women. How to make the taxation something which is not just progressive and fair, but also gender positive. Why aren't we engaging in that? Why isn't CSW weighing in on those discussions? It would have a big impact. It would help many of the member nations to decide on many of these votes that are going to be coming up on every single aspect of taxation and the different subgroups. So this is really, if you like, a request to all of you at CSW and elsewhere to get involved in some of the non-CSW actions, instead of just having a separate, siloed set of discussions that finally, let's be frank, doesn't go anywhere else in the UN system. Let's get engaged in the rest of the UN system and then see how we can actually work together to transform things. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghosh, for, I think, looking at the chat, what was a very invigorating presentation, and also call to action to be much more coalition-minded in the way that we advocate within the UN system. And so finally, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Salla Tuminen, who is the president of Zonta International, to share some examples from what's happening within Zonta and at the level of the grassroots. Over to you, Salla.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to the session. It's really my pleasure to be here today and listen to these wonderful speakers. I come from Finland, the country which is often seen as a role model for gender equality. It's naturally and true to some extent, but I can also tell you that we still also have things to do when it comes to the improving women's possibilities, for example, of leadership positions, and be it on the public or private sector. When thinking about today's topic, I decided to focus on women in leadership and Zonta's approach to women in decision-making positions, and why Zonta sees it important and what could be done to take the next steps to make it reality. My focus is perhaps not so much on the economical empowerment directly, but naturally the matters are interlinked, and women's access to decision-making indirectly has implications also to economic empowerment of women. And as already noted, I perhaps bring a more grassroots view to the topic, talking about we women, all of us, how are we living to these treaties, standards, principles, agendas we also have heard today. At the end, it really comes back to each individual of us and our own behavior. There might be high-level aims, but the reality is lived in everyday lives. First, a few words about Zonta. I know have been recognizing many familiar faces here, being active and passionate Zontians, but nevertheless, for any other, just setting the kind of the basis here. Zonta International is an international human rights organization building a better world for women and girls, and we are approximately 26,000 members in 64 countries. We see a world in which women's rights are recognized as human rights. Every woman is able to achieve her full potential. And really about today's topic, in such a world, women have access to all resources, and are represented in decision-making positions on an equal basis with men. So we updated Zonta International strategy just very recently, and have decided to focus on 4 very important topics for women: violence against women and girls, climate justice, education equality, and coming to today's topic, women in leadership. Let me elaborate a bit more what we do in this field briefly. But before we take a look at it, I wanted to set the kind of the basis why Zonta sees it's important to have women in decision-making roles and support also such women. Well, perhaps not nothing which is a kind of a new news as such, but very important things when we think about society. Economically educated female populations increase countries' productivity and fuels economic growth. That has been evidenced in many of the research. Economic loss could even be reached. The global economy could miss out significant growth opportunities if women are left out. Studies have shown that gender diversity in leadership correlates with better financial performance and innovation. And today's world is really living about innovation. Without more women in decision-making roles, businesses and economies may not reach really their full potential. Talking about economic empowerment, strengthening the role of women in decision-making and the economy is pivotal for sustainable economic growth. And what is really important nowadays, it's not really about economical growth, but the focus should be on sustainable economical growth. And by ensuring women's perspectives and concerns are integrated into economic policies, we can foster a more inclusive and resilient economy. And this approach not only taps into a broader talent pool, but also drives innovation and productivity. So the economic growth, especially the sustainable economic growth, will be slower without women. And investing in women's economical empowerment is not just a moral imperative, but a strategic one. It's really that the gender diversity in leadership correlates with better financial performance and economic stability. By prioritizing women's roles in the economy, we pave the way for long-term prosperity and a more just society overall. About the social justice, which was already mentioned here, of course, incorporating women's views and addressing their unique challenges is essential for justice-oriented restructuring of society. When women are empowered to participate fully in decision-making processes, it leads to more equitable and fair outcomes. This shift can help dismantle systematic barriers and promote social justice for all, not only for women or girls, but for everybody. Then, of course, women's interests and issues may continue to be underrepresented in decision-making processes. And this can then result in policies and practices that do not adequately address the challenges faced by women, which is, of course, not right. Talking about education and education equality, which is also one of focus areas for Zonta International. There are statistics which says that some countries lose more than $1 billion US a year by failing to educate women and girls. Universal secondary education has a multiplier effect that builds wealth and health in the developing country. Investing in the education of women and girls creates high returns, such as breaking cycles of poverty, fostering economic growth, and empowering women generally. Lack of diversity in leadership can stifle creativity and innovation, as already also mentioned earlier. Diverse teams are more likely to generate new ideas and solutions, which are essential for progress in various fields. Talking about STEM fields, women make only 28% of STEM workforce globally, quite of a low number as such. This leads to a lack of diversity and inclusion, and therefore limits the potential of the STEM industry. And as society and industries grow exponentially worldwide, for example, with artificial intelligence and technology, closing the gender gap will not only bolster sustainable tech-enabled growth and innovation, but it is also an economic necessity as such. Talking about climate justice. Well, when extreme weather causes devastating disasters around the world, women are less likely than men to recover. Women are less able to rebuild their lives due to widening gender gaps in education, pay, legal rights, and societal responses. A female voice is needed in leadership for the battle against climate change in order to make sustainable solutions for both women and men to the whole society. Also, a large portion of the talent pool would remain underutilized. Women bring diverse skills, experiences, and perspectives that are crucial for addressing complex challenges and driving progress. Holistic development as such, ensuring that women's preoccupations and concerns are adequately addressed contributes to a holistic societal development. Women's roles in families and communities often provide them with unique insights into societal issues. Women's active participation in decision-making can lead to more comprehensive and effective solution to societal challenges. And workplace culture, something not to be forgotten about. If women are not heard and listened, not seen, cultures may remain less inclusive and supportive of diversity, which of course means much more and much broader aspect than a gender diversity aspect only. This can affect employees' morale, retention, overall organizational health as such. Promoting women's participation in decision-making roles is not just a matter of fairness, it's essential for creating more prosperous, innovative, and equitable world. Education as such is human rights. The right to education is enshrined in various international agreements, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention of the Rights of the Child, etc. These agreements recognize education as a fundamental human right that should be accessible to all. And receiving education makes girls less likely to marry young or more likely to lead healthy, productive lives. And educated girls earn higher incomes, granting then higher income for the economy, participate in decisions that affect them, and build better future for their communities. Only 3 out of 4 girls complete their secondary education worldwide still today in 2024. Quite a scary number. Without continued education, girls are less eligible to fill leadership roles also in the future. Zonda is a human rights organization, as noted, and therefore also promoting education as a human right. So what is Zonda doing? How are we promoting, in addition to general advocacy work on the access to education, talking about leadership, etc.? We do have our educational programs. We have Amelia Earhart Fellowship Program, through which has been already established in 1938. We award annually 30 women who are pursuing doctoral degrees in aerospace, engineering, and space sciences, typically areas where women are not well represented. We also have a Zonta Young Women in Leadership Award, which we award annually quite young women, even girls, who demonstrate leadership skills and commitment to public service. And then we have 2 new awards, Zonta Women in STEM Award and Zonta Women in Business Leadership Award. With the STEM Award, we want to award women aged 18 to 35 years of age who are making remarkable accomplishments and innovations in the field of STEM.
I'm so sorry
And
to interrupt, Stella. I'm wondering if we could also leave some of the examples during the question period so that we can give enough time for people to ask questions. And then that way you will be able to bring in those examples, if that's all right, just because I'm trying to watch the time and just giving people enough time to be able to take the floor and ask questions of the speakers. So maybe we can spotlight all the other panelists, and I will start with some of the questions that we saw in the chat. But please do take the time to reflect on some of the insights that have been shared. You're welcome to put the questions in the chat, but also if you would like to raise your hand, we will open the floor for people to be able to ask their questions out loud. So what I'll do is I'll start with the questions that were put in the chat to give you a moment to collect your thoughts and think of any questions you'd like to ask. And then once we see who would like to actually ask their questions out loud, we'll be able to open the floor for that. So if we could spotlight our panelists. And then I'll read out the first question that we see here, which, although these questions are addressed to individual panelists, if others have thoughts, of course, you are welcome to come in and offer your insights. So the first question that I have here is for Dr. Njuki, and it's from Rima Hooper. Rima says, I am the United Nations Youth Representative for the Medical Women's International Association. My question is, as a young woman in the field of healthcare, what is CSW planning to do to empower women in healthcare leadership, considering that women constitute 70% of the healthcare workforce? And maybe I can read out the other question also connected to UN Women from Marceli de Camargo. Is there any initiative from UN Women to encourage UN national delegates to help NGOs to be present in the CSW inside their delegation? And I'm assuming this is inside the member state delegations that come for the CSW. So if you would like to address some of these questions, over to you, Jemima.
Thanks. Just starting on the last one around member state delegation. Although we do encourage diversity in member state delegations to CSW, in many cases we really do not have control over that, but we do encourage that they are diverse, that they include governments, they include civil society organizations, they include youth delegates, and sometimes we see that it varies a lot across countries. So it's sort of like a ideal, but at the same time, we also don't have an eye and the decision making on what constitutes the different delegations. The second one on empowering women, especially young women in the health sector. So one of the things that we co-convene with the ILO and with the OECD is what we call the Equal Pay International Coalition. And part of what we're doing in that coalition, first is just collecting the data on especially the gender pay gap, because we know that there are structural issues around the sectors where women are overrepresented, that there is an undervaluing of that work. So we see some of those gaps, especially prominent in sectors like the health sector. And one of the things we're doing is really encouraging pay transparency across countries, across organizations for the different sectors, but also pay legislation that ensures that there's no discrimination and both men, women, and other gender diverse groups are actually paid the same framework of equal value. I'll just give that as an example, but there's a lot more that's going on in just making sure that some of these structural issues we see in the workplace can be addressed in a much more systemic way.
Thank you so much. So I think what I will do, just to give chance for those who have raised their hands, is that I'll go to the questions, live questions, and I'll go back to the chat. So I'd like to give the floor to Nkechi Ifediora, if you would like to come in and ask your question. And maybe before you say your question, if I could just remind everybody that we want to be brief in our questions so that we have opportunity to hear from as many individuals as possible. Over to you, Nkechi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. So I'm Dr. Nkechi Ifediora from London, author of Sparkle. My question is for Teresa, the first speaker, who made the really interesting observation that women are often subsidizing societies with the unpaid care and services they often provide. I wonder if there's more that we can do to support women with prioritizing self-care. So obviously not just beauty, but their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health, because that's absolutely key as well, isn't it?
Thank you so much. And I although I do recognize that the question was directed to Dr. Njuki, I think others are also welcome to come in if you like. But maybe we can open the floor for Dr. Njuki to come in, but then others, if you want to comment, please.
Thank you. Just some quick reflections, and I'll ask as well others, Jati and Sala, to come in as well. So one of the approaches we take into care, of course, in addition to some of the perspective that Jati shared in terms of really collecting the data on time use, we have a big program called Women Count, and part of it is working with national statistical offices on including time use as part of their national data collection, because we've seen very few countries that are collecting that data. And even when they do, they're doing it as a one-off and not really looking at how that is changing. And so we are really advocating for the provision of care services as a public good, and for countries to really look at their fiscal space and see where those kinds of investments can come from. Because when you have women spending 4, 5, 6 hours a day on unpaid care, it then limits their ability not just to engage in other economic activities, but also their own leisure, their own mental well-being. So looking at how do we actually drive public investments in care services and provision of care as a public good. We are working with a couple of governments around putting in place these policy frameworks. We've seen a lot of in countries like in Latin America with the Buenos Aires commitment to really committing to a national system of care. And moving towards what they're calling more caring societies. And that's just the first step. And then the next step is saying, okay, we now have a policy framework. How do we put the needed investments, the needed financing to actually then translate that care policy into public investments in care? And this is not just at national level, but also at city level. So we work, for example, with cities like the Mexico City, the city of Bogota. How do they actually start planning for care infrastructure as part of their urban or rural development infrastructure? But really the goal is to make sure that this kind of provision of care services, provision of infrastructure that supports women is part of public expenditure and part of public investments in the care sector. You will see we're starting to recognize that even when governments think about infrastructure, that does not include care infrastructure. They think about rural markets and roads, but not care infrastructure. But also recognizing that care goes beyond the infrastructure, because it's also ensuring that the care providers, that there's quality of care, etc. So it's a much larger conversation about the investments that are needed to make this happen.
Thank you so much. And I recognize that one of our panelists may have to leave us soon. So I don't know if Salah, you wanted to come in before you have to leave us. And my apologies about the timing, but the floor is over to you.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you, speakers. Yes, my question was to Dr. Ghosh. I'm Shaila Rao Mistry.
No, I'm sorry, Shaila. Sorry, I was giving the floor to Salah to come in.
Oh, sorry, I heard Shaila.
Yes,
Hold on.
very similar names. Please, Salah.
Lily, I just want to add, I also need to leave soon. I was told it's a 1-hour meeting, so I have another thing in 15 minutes, but just to let you know. Maybe we collect all the questions and then, yeah?
Sure. So maybe we can give
Instead of doing one by one, we collect all the questions and respond, because otherwise I certainly cannot stay beyond 15 minutes. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. So maybe what I could do is I could read a few of the other questions and we can pass the floor over to the both of you before you will have to go.
No, let's hear Shaila and Fatima. I mean, you can't keep excluding people. So just let everybody ask their questions and then we answer and move on. Yeah.
It's just I have some questions that came in from the chat, so I was going to read.
So we'll get all the questions. Get all the questions. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I was going to read the questions that came in from the chat and then have the two that are raised and then open the floor for the both of you. It's a challenge to get everything into the constrained time that we have. So one of the questions that I believe is for Dr. Ghosh is about the tracking of data. And so how to action, I think it was related to some of the suggestions that were made, how to action some of those suggestions. So, I mean, the question was about, how do we do this for the governments, especially when there's a tendency to ignore gendered priorities from the government. So how to proactively act on this. And then there was a question about some of the attitudes that we see with the rise of women speaking up for the needs of women in the economy. Then we see kind of this a backlash on messages about women with high value, women that need to be maintained, etc. Especially this is an individual who's talking about perhaps in regions of the world, in non-Western regions of the world. So how do we then kind of combat these oppositional attitudes that we see? And then the other question that came in was about how can we challenge the UN to not function as business as usual. So then maybe we can open the floor and hear from Shaila. And again, just encourage the questions to be brief, and then we'll pass the floor to Fatima. Over to you, Shaila.
Thank you. I'm Shaila Rao Mistry. I'm founder, CEO of STEM Institute and representing US Women's Caucus and Graduate Women International. And I wanted to focus on the non-CSW conversations that need to take place within CSW with all the non-CSW entities. The real decision-making is happening outside CSW. The thing is to drag those, bring them in. That's one aspect that I'd like to hear a little more about. And also the other thing is changing mindsets to all the factors, indicators that you had mentioned. Changing mindsets lies at the heart of any change. And how do we accomplish that? Just also wanted to say that I chair the women decision making at the Geneva B+30 review, and it's all focused on that. So I'd like to hear comments from everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaila. Over to you, Fatma.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Ivy and Pamela and all the NGO CSW team. You are making great meetings, really. And to the all presented, to the all my colleagues who made the presentation, I benefit them a lot. As I listen to these presentations, I can't help but I compare them to the situation in my own country, in Turkey. I'm representing Red Pepper Association, which is based in Turkey, Istanbul, and also the Independent Women's Organization in Turkey. We made a project, STEM project. Let me say that STEM women workers in STEM is less than 10% in Turkey. So as an engineer, it's deeply saddened me, really. We implemented a project called Breaking Gender Barriers in STEM and work to encourage young women to take in this field. I wanted to make this call to all of my colleagues, all of the groups, all of these activist feminists. We need to find a way to share our experiences and our successes with each other, not just in the annual meetings, but it should be in the continuous meetings, continuous basis. I believe that we can find the solutions. For instance, we formed a group, Transnational Women Solidarity Group. If you would like to join, please leave your emails, I can add you. But there should be some other way in the NGO CSW. So this is a call for Ivy and Pamela as well. Please, let's form a solidarity and a shareable environment for all of us and in continuous basis. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much, Fatma. So perhaps we can open the floor from our panelists. We can hear from Sala, Jayati, and then Jamima. So in that order, if that's all right. Thank you.
Okay, just very briefly, unfortunately, I will need to step out just in a few minutes, but covering some of the questions which were just raised, I would have concluded my talk actually with a message saying that we should actually stop talking about these issues just between women, and we should also should stop just about talking. I'm very much into more action and not only talking. But anyhow, the emphasis should be put on the gender equality. It's not just a women's issue, but a shared responsibility that benefits everyone. And there, I would also would like to raise the men who are encouraged to talk for women and for women's rights. We should also be recognizing these men and giving them a kind of recognition on what they do, because this is not really all of this what we have been discussing today. It's not a women's issue, it's a societal issue. I would have liked to talk about this message much more, but unfortunately need to step out. Thank you for this opportunity to be here today. Thank you for all the speakers, good questions, etc. See you somewhere some other day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sala. And I think this is a recognition of how much work there is to do, that our schedules are all pressed. Please, over to you, Jayati.
Yeah, thank you so much for these very thoughtful questions. And so let me look at the data issue first. You know, the point about collecting data is that it generates awareness. At the moment, everybody tracks GDP, the policymakers, the media, and therefore all of society. And it is somehow still, despite everything we know about it, taken as the basic indicator of economic progress. If you are tracking these other indicators, if you track, for example, the labor market indicator, even if GDP has supposedly gone up by 5%, you can say, wait a minute, why hasn't this labor market indicator improved at all? What's going on here? And then if you unpack it and say that it's largely related to lower median wages for women or falling employment for, you know, it enables a discussion that has to ultimately also land at policy tables. So I think knowing about something is the first step to actually mobilizing about it. And at the moment, we don't know enough because we don't track these indicators. So I think these indicators are very important for that reason. And it adds, we're not saying substitute GDP because it's not going to happen right now. So let's at least move on to recognizing these other indicators. And I want to appreciate the work UN Women is doing on the time use surveys, because again, it is something that is absolutely critical, but because it's only UN Women pushing it, it's not good enough. It needs to be a UN-wide thing. If the UN statistical system says we need to get time use surveys from every country, it changes the game. And so that's why we also need to work across the UN organizations to push for particular ideas as well. How do we get action afterwards? Basically through the mobilization. And we can't do the mobilization unless we know what's going on in different countries and places. The backlash issue is a very big one, and I wish I knew I had an answer. it's really difficult. And it's certainly, I noticed there was a question in the chat about intimidation from men, which again is so common. And I think all of us have experienced it. I see my junior colleagues experiencing it all the time. I mean, I'm an old woman now and they can't push me around in quite the same way, but I see it happening in front of me all the time. And of course, we've all experienced it. I think the way to cope with it is really the only way to keep our confidence and to keep pushing back against the backlash is solidarity. Somebody mentioned that we should have regular meetings where we exchange experiences. We should constantly be in touch with each other about how they've handled particular situations. So we should be forging these interactions. It's not just alliances, we're already allied, but we should be forging much more interactions so that we are aware that we're not alone in facing these. And we maybe get ideas from others about how they have handled particular thorny or complicated situations of backlash, of the empire striking back kind of thing. And that, I think, also relates to Shaila's comment about changing mindsets, which is such a tough call, right? It goes on, and just when you think you've managed it, it turns out you didn't really. So it's a very tough call, and I do sympathize, especially in the business forum. I've been there. It's something else. The non-CSW part, and that I think is related to another question in the chat about how do we get the UN to move beyond business as usual? Because I think we're all seeing it, right? I mean, we all had huge expectations for the SDG summit. I know many developing country people had expectations last year. It turned out, shall we say politely, not to deliver very much. Then we've all had expectations from the Summit for the Future. And I think we now know that that too is not really going to get into the things that ultimately would actually cause a change. And that's not because people have not tried hard and been well-meaning and put lots of excellent ideas out there. There's so many wonderful papers from the UNSG's office, from different groups, I was on a board that was supposed to give all these proposals for effective multilateralism. I mean, there's zillions of excellent proposals out there. But yeah, the geopolitics, the power play, and all of that means that it's not just at the General Assembly, but the UN institutions themselves are resistant to change. Here again, I think the importance of coalition building among like-minded UN organizations is very strong. I am involved with the ILO, and I know how frustrated they are with so much of the stuff going on. I don't know how much interaction or working together there is with them. I'm involved with UNDP. They are also frustrated. Again, maybe there should be a lot more interaction and working together. And UNDP, UN Women, CSW, it's all in New York. You can actually do that. I'm involved with, what's the other thing that I've been involved with, which is also deeply frustrated? The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. They have been fighting for a human rights economy. And basically, they want the same kind of economy we want. Yeah, it's a completely feminist agenda as well. But it's not getting traction. They tried to get the IMF and the World Bank to agree to at least a human rights audit of their actions. And you can imagine how far that went. But because they're trying this alone, supposing we actually get a lot of these organizations to work together to demand these same things, instead of saying, well, I'm only going to do this, you're going to do that, and none of them has much impact. If 5 or 6 of these very big and important UN organizations and the CSW, maybe the CSW can be the convener, I don't know, gets together and then puts a whole platform that, I mean, the IMF and the World Bank are ultimately part of the UN system, although they try to pretend otherwise. That to get some accountability, maybe that forces a change beyond what we're all forced to, which is the whole business as usual thing. I mean, I'm just thinking aloud. I know many of you will have ideas out there, but I do know that that's a direction we need to go.
Thank you so much for taking the time to answer all the questions. And I know that we're pressed for time. Maybe we can turn to Jemima before we go to the close of the meeting.
And please forgive me if I genuinely have to leave now. So I'm so sorry for that. But thank you so much for a very interesting discussion.
Thank you for joining us. Over to you, Jemima.
Thank you.
A lot has been said already. I think I'll just close with 2 points. One is that solidarity and equal, a common voice within the UN system to start pushing for this. And I think we're starting to see some progress. For example, we have a gender equality acceleration plan that led from the Secretary General's office that UN Women is serving as a secretariat for. And some of these issues are actually covered in that gender equality acceleration plan. So we're starting to see some traction and some organizing around common issues across the UN system, of course, also recognizing some of the difficulties and challenges that Gayatri has mentioned. I think in terms of my last point on engaging outside of the NGO CSW, as UN Women, we are providing support to a lot of intergovernmental processes, and these include, for example, the FFG, the climate debates and climate negotiations. And in each of these intergovernmental processes, there is actually organizing of women's rights organizations, of the women's movement. And if you're not members of the women's movement, I would really encourage you to be, because this is also how we start influencing these other spaces. We have the Women Major Group that's heavily engaged in the discussions around the FFD. We have the Women and Gender Constituency that's heavily engaged around issues of climate justice and really pushing the agenda for climate finance and climate justice within the Conference of Parties on climate. So there's also these spaces where we need to really bring our solidarity and bring the voice of the women's movement to bear on what member states and what the intergovernmental processes are pushing for. So there is entry points that we can actually take advantage of in terms of influencing the agenda around the intergovernmental spaces where influence and decisions are being made.
Thank you so much, Jemima. And I just want to thank all our panelists, even though some of them have had to leave us due to other commitments. I really appreciate the strong insights that they brought and their energy and enthusiasm. And I hope that you have enjoyed the conversation as much as I have, and really would like to thank all of you for your questions and taking the floor and making the conversation quite lively. So I would now like to turn the floor back over to our wonderful co-chairs.
Thank you. Excuse me.
Thank you, Lily, and Rosa too. Thank you for putting together this first program for the year. This is a great start, isn't it, Pamela?
It was so powerful. And thanks to Dr. Njuki, Dr. Ghosh, and to Sela, to Minin for being with us and for providing your powerful insights. And as someone said in the chat, which I think is important for us to reflect on, that we're creating a space where we can listen, witness, be encouraged, think creatively and critically. And that's exactly a perfect definition of today's session. So thank you to our audience and to our panelists and to Lily and Rosa for the hard work.
Please feel free to open your mics, and yeah, we have to follow up on some of the all the things that were suggested. Also, there's never enough to do, right? I mean, we're not very busy. So we just have to keep adding to our list, but we can do it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
So please turn on your cameras so that we can see you. And goodbye. Please let us hear your voices.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for getting the recording out as soon as possible. We want to share it.
Good. Excellent.
We do too.
Thank you.
Nothing like being there live.
Thank you so much.
Being there
All
live.
right,
Thank you, Ivy.
everyone.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, Lily.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
And
Good to
welcome.
see